Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses. As we continue with Part 15, Origin of Mithraicism, Part 2, The Worship of Mithras and Serapis from the Gnostics and Their Remains, Ancient and Medieval by C.W. King. Part 2, The Worship of Mithras and Serapis. The Worship of Mithras. 1. Origin of Mithraicism. The innumerable monuments of every kind bequeathed to us by the widely spread worship of the deity styled Mithras serve at the same time copiously to illustrate the important contributions of Zoroastrian doctrine towards the composition of Gnosticism. The Mithraic religion, according to Plutarch, first made its appearance in Italy upon Pompey's reduction of the Cilician Pirates, of whom it was the national worship. And who, when broken up into colonists and slaves all over Italy, propagated it amongst their conquerors. This deity, under other titles, had ever been the great god of Pontus. As patron of Sinope, he appears under the form of Helios Dionysos upon the medallion of Pharnaces II. In his proper name, he was the patron of Trebizond, being worshipped on the Mount Mithras, overhanging that most ancient of Grecian colonies. For destroying his statue, the fanatic Eugenius, justly punished by Diocletian, was adopted in the succeeding times of superstition for the tutelary saint of the Byzantine Empire of Trebizond. In the new soil, the novel religion flourished so rapidly as in the space of 2 centuries to supersede, coupled with the earlier introduced Serapis worship, the primitive Hellenic and Etruscan deities. In fact, long before this final triumph over the skeptical, Pliny appears disposed to accept Mithraicism in its essential principle as the only religion capable of satisfying a rational inquirer, as may be deduced from this noble passage, 2:4. Thus, during the 2nd and 3rd centuries of the Roman Empire, Mithras and Serapis had come almost to engross the popular worship, even to the remotest limits of the known world. For Mithraicism was originally the religion taught by Zoroaster, although somewhat changed and materialized so as better to assimilate itself to the previously established nature worship of the West. Under this grosser form, it took its name from Mithras, who in the Zend-Avesta is not the supreme being, or Muzd, but the chief of the subordinate powers, the 7 Amsha spans. Mithra is the Zend name for the sun, the proper mansion of this spirit, but not the spirit himself. Hence, the great oath of Artaxerxes Mnemon was, by the light of Mithras, a counterpart of the tremendous adjuration of our William the Conqueror, by the splendor of God. But the materialistic Greeks at once identified the Persian spirit with their own substantial Phoebus and Hyperion. Thus, Ovid has, placat equo Persis radius Hyperiona cinctum. In this view of his nature, Mithras was identified with other types of the sun god, such as the Phanaces of Asia Minor and the Dionysos of Greece, and thereby soon usurped the place of the latter in the long-established mysteries, the ancient Dionysia. The importance into which the Mithraica had grown by the middle of the 2nd century may be estimated from a fact mentioned by Lampridius, that the emperor himself, Commodus, condescended to be initiated into them. Nay more, with their penances and tests of the courage of the neophyte, they may be said to have been maintained by unbroken tradition through the secret societies of the Middle Ages, then by the Rosicrucians, down to that faint reflex of the latter, the Freemasonry of our own times. But this curious point must be reserved for the last section of this treatise, investigating the nature of the last named societies. My present object is to point out the gradations by which the Mithraic principle passed into the Egyptian and semi-Christian forms of Gnosticism. The mystic name Abraxas, asserted to have been the coinage of the Alexandrian Basilides, is said to mean either in actual Coptic holy name, as Bellarmine will have it, or, as seems equally probable, is merely the Hebrew habraka, blessing, grecized in the same sense. That the symbolic figure embodying the idea of the Abraxas god has a reference to the sun in all its components is yet more evident, as shall be shown hereafter. Similarly, the Brahmins apply their ineffable name Aum to the fierce and all-pervading sun, and Macrobius devotes much curious learning to prove that all the great gods of antiquity, whatever their names and figures, were no more than various attempts at personifying the one deity whose residence is the sun. It must here be remembered that Basilides was by no means a Christian heretic, as the later fathers found it expedient to represent him, but rather, as his contemporary Clemens relates, a philosopher devoted to the study of divine things, and thus possibly imbued with such Buddhistic notions as the intercourse between Alexandria and the cities of Gujarat, then ruled over by the Jaina kings, may have naturalized both in Egypt and in Palestine. This metropolis, as the grand emporium for foreign doctrines as well as foreign wares, supplies the reason for the frequent union of Mithras with Abraxas in the same stone, proceeding from the Alexandrian talisman factory. A curious exemplification is a green jasper, Marlborough, bearing on one side the normal Zoroastrian device, Mithras slaughtering the bull, on the other the well-known Gnostic pantheist, a truly Indian syncretism, which converts all deities from separate beings into mere deified attributes of one and the same God, and, for the initiated few that is, reduces that seemingly unlimited polytheism into the acknowledgement of the existence of the Supreme Creator. That model of a perfect prince, Severus Alexander, must have imbibed a strong tinge of the gnosis, as indeed might have been expected from his birthplace and style of education. For although upon every seventh day he went up to worship in the capital, and also regularly visited the temples of the other Roman gods, he nevertheless was intending to build a temple unto Christ, and to rank him in the number of the gods. Which thing Hadrian also is said to have thought of, and actually to have ordered temples without images to be built in all the chief cities of the empire, which same temples, because they contain no gods, are now called temples raised to Hadrian himself, although in reality he is reported to have prepared them for the purpose above named. But he was prevented from carrying out his design by those who consulted the oracles, sacra, and discovered that if it should be carried out, everybody would turn Christian, and thereby the other temples would be all deserted. Lampridius 143. Indeed, there is every reason to believe that, as in the East, the worship of Serapis was at first combined with Christianity, and gradually merged into it with an entire change of name, though not of substance, carrying along with it many of its proper ideas and rites. So, in the West, the Mithras worship produced a similar effect upon the character of the religion that took its place. Seal, in his admirable treatise upon Mithraicism, Mithra, page 287, is of opinion that as long as the Roman dominion lasted in Germany, we find traces there of the Mosaic law, and in the same way as there were single Jewish families, so were there single Christians existing amongst the heathen. The latter, however, for the most part ostensibly paid worship to the Roman gods in order to escape persecution, holding secretly in their hearts the religion of Christ. It is by no means improbable that under the permitted symbols of Mithras they worship the Son of God and the mysteries of Christianity. In this point of view, the Mithraic monuments, so frequent in Germany, are evidences to the faith of the early Christian Romans. This same supremacy of the Mithras worship in his own times makes the grand scheme of Heliogabalus prove less insane than it strikes the modern reader at the first impression. He was intending, according to report, to permit no other worship at Rome than that of his own god and namesake, the Emessene aerolite, apt emblem of the sun, bringing together in his temple the fire of Vesta, the Palladium, the Ancilia, and all the other most venerated relics, and moreover the religion of the Jews and Samaritans, and the devotion of the Christians, Lampridius 3. To such a heterogeneous union, that numerous section of the Roman public who shared Macrobius's sentiments on the nature of all ancient gods could have found no possible objection so far as the principle was concerned. This curious distinction between religio and devotio is meant to mark the difference between a national and established creed and one held by individuals, without any public sanction. That such a relationship to Christianity was actually alleged by the partisans of Mithraicism, when in its decline, is proved by the remarkable declaration of Augustine himself. I remember that the priests of the fellow in the cap, Ilius Piliati, used at one time to say, "Our capped one is himself a Christian." In this asserted affinity probably lay the motive that induced Constantine to adopt for the commonest type of his coinage, the sole currency of the western provinces, and retain long after his conversion the figure of Saul himself, with the legend, "To the invincible son, my companion," or guardian. A type capable of a double interpretation, meaning equally the ancient Phoebus and the new Son of Righteousness, and thereby unobjectionable to Gentile and Christian alike, of the equally divided population amongst whom it circulated. Nay more, this emperor, when avowedly Christian, selected for the grandest ornament of his new capital a colossal Apollo mounted upon a lofty column, which retained its place until cast down by an earthquake in the reign of Alexius Comnenus. Through a similar interchange, the old festival held on the 25th day of December in honor of the birthday of the Invincible One, and celebrated by the great games of the circus as marked in the calendar, was afterwards transferred to the commemoration of the birth of Christ, of which the real day was, as the fathers confess, totally unknown. Chrysostom, for example, declares that the birthday of Christ had then lately been fixed at Rome upon that day, in order that whilst the heathen were busied with their own profane ceremonies, the Christians might perform their holy rites without molestation, signifying that 24 consecutive races of chariots were exhibited on that occasion in the circus. Maximus and Mithras was the more readily admitted as the type of Christ, creator and maintainer of the universe, inasmuch as the Zendavesta declares him to be the first emanation of Ormuzd, the good principle and the manifestation of himself unto the world. Now, it was from this very creed that the Jews, during their long captivity in the Persian Empire, of which when restored to Palestine they formed but a province, derived all the angelology of their religion, even to its minutest details, such as we find it flourishing in the times of the Second Kingdom. Not until then are they discovered to possess the belief in a future state, of rewards and punishments, the latter carried on in a fiery lake, the existence of a complete hierarchy of good and evil angels taken almost verbatim from the lists given by the Zendavesta, the soul's immortality and the last judgment, all of them essential parts of the Zoroastrian scheme, and recognized by Josephus as the fundamental doctrines of the Judaism of his own times. To all these ideas, Moses in the law makes not the slightest allusion. His promises and threatenings are all of the earthy. He preaches a religion of secularists, and such a religion was, down to the latest days of Jerusalem, still maintained by the Sadducees. Now these Sadducees were the most ancient and respectable families of the nation, who boasted of keeping the law of Moses pure and uncontaminated from the admixture of foreign notions imbibed by the commonalty during their long sojourn amongst the Gentiles. Nay more, there is some reason to accept matters etymology of the name of their opponents, the Pharisees, as actually signifying Persians, being a term of contempt for the holders of the newfangled doctrines picked up from their conquerors. And this etymology is a much more rational one and more consistent with the actual elements of the word than the common one, making it to mean separatists, an epithet by no means applicable to a party constituting the immense majority of the race. It is only necessary now to allude to the ingenious theory of Bishop Warburton, set forth in his Divine Legation of Moses, who converts the absence of all spiritualism from his teaching into the strongest argument for its being directly inspired from heaven. But from whatever source derived, how closely does the Zoroastrian idea of the nature and office of Mithras coincide with the definition of those of Christ, as given by the author of the Epistle to the Hebrews, that profound Jewish theologian who styles him the brightness or reflection of his glory, the express image of his person, upholding all things by the word of his power, and again being made so much better than the angels, as he hath by inheritance obtained a more excellent name than they. And here it may be observed that the reflection of the invisible supreme in his first emanation is a distinguishing feature in most of the Gnostic systems. The latter word, literally impression of a seal, is the exact counterpart of the Hebrew title Tikan, the primal emanation. Mithras used to be invoked together with the sun, and thus, being confounded with that luminary, became the object of a separate worship, which ultimately superseded that of Ormuzd himself. And this was the only one propagated by the Pontic colonists and their converts amongst the nations of the West. Secondary deities often usurp the places of those of the first rank, so Vishnu and Siva have entirely eclipsed Brahma. Serapis had played the same part with the pharaonic gods of Egypt, and yet more striking analogies from modern creeds are too obvious to require quotation. Through this relationship of ideas, Mithraic symbolism found its way into early Christian art in many of its particulars. The bas-relief over the portal of the baptistry at Parma, a work of the 12th century, has all the aspect of a Mithraic monument, and certainly its design would be very difficult to understand from a scriptural point of view. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment, and if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.